Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Christy Pearson with Friends of the Hennepin County Library. Now, for those of you joining us for the first time, Talk of the Stacks is a free author lecture series produced by Friends with guest authors who focus on the craft of writing, as well as urgent social, economic, and global topics. Now, whether you are here with us in person at Minneapolis Central Library or joining us from home, we're glad that you're here. Now, as we begin this evening, on behalf of the library and Friends, we would like to begin tonight with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that in Hennepin County, we live and work on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. By offering this land acknowledgement, we commit to recognizing Indigenous nations and to holding ourselves accountable to the work of reconciliation. Thank you. Well, I would next like to recognize our generous sponsors who help make this series possible. Many thanks to the Star Tribune, US Bank, LSC Architects, and Knorr Companies. Let's give them a hand. Well, this evening, we are honored to have with us the legendary journalist, Charlayne Hunter-Gault, author of the new book, My People, 5 Decades of Writing About Black Lives. Now, if you were moved by the essays in this collection, we invite you to further your experience with a visit to our library. Just down the hall from here in Cargill Hall, Minneapolis Central Library is proud to present for the second time, Testify, Americana from Slavery to Today. This powerful exhibition of African-American arts and artifacts from the Diane and Alan Page collection is on display through March 29th and provides a visual look at history that is uniquely informative and moving. And to learn more about the program and events that were inspired by Testify, you can check out the library's website at hclib.org. And now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's special guests. Tonight's moderator is our newest Friends board member, Lissa Jones, and she's a highly sought after speaker, facilitator, and culture coach. She hosted Urban Agenda on Camel J Radio for 15 years and is now the host of Black Market Reads, a podcast that seeks to amplify the voices of Black writers. Our guest of honor, Charlayne Hunter-Gault, is an Emmy Award-winning journalist and the author of 5 books. She began her career as a reporter for The New Yorker, which she still contributes to today, and started her television career as a local news anchor in Washington, D.C. Renowned for her coverage of race, the civil rights movement, and South Africa, Hunter-Gault has worked as a correspondent for NPR, CNN, NBC, and PBS. She has received not 1, but 2 Emmy Awards for her work on apartheid's people for the PBS NewsHour, and 2 Peabody Awards for her work covering Africa for NPR. Hunter-Gault's most recent book, My People, was released in October, and Kirkus deemed it as one of the best nonfiction books of the year, calling it, and I quote, a wonderful showcase of the work of an invaluable 20th century journalist. Please join me in welcoming moderator Lissa Jones and our guest of honor, Charlayne Hunter-Gault, to Talk of the Stacks.
Thank you. Ooh, it feels heavy to sit up here with you.
Well, I feel heavy sitting up here with you.
Well, that's quite a compliment. How did you get inspired to write? How did you know that you wanted that to be your medium?
How did I know I wanted to
write? How did you know?
Generally?
Yes.
I think it happened, actually, when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My grandmother, who was self-taught and used to read 3 newspapers a day, and I would sit at her knees and wait until she finished the part with the comics. And I started reading the comics. And I fell in love with the comic strip character, which most of you won't remember because most of you are too young, Brenda Starr. And I went to my mom one day and I said, you know, when I grow up, I want to be like Brenda Starr. And you have to remember now, I put it in context because these were the days of segregation, and there is no way, no paper I could have worked for in those days. At least there were black papers, but no papers like Brenda Starr wrote for. But my mother didn't say that's not what little black girls do. My mother said, she was very casual most of the time and understated. She said, oh, if that's what you want to do. And that was all the inspiration I needed. And then, you know, we talk about Black history these days, and it's so important because while Brenda Starr was my first role model, when I got to my segregated Black elementary school that often got books with from the white schools with the pages torn out and somehow otherwise damaged, but I learned about Ida B. Wells. Now you know who that was.
Oh, yes.
Ida B. Wells was one of the most crusading African American journalists. She was a female, but she was everything. And she was active in trying to bring about equality in this country way back in those days when she was working, and help us on our road to a more perfect union.
Mm.
And so, and then we moved out of this small town and moved to Atlanta. And when I got to high school a couple of years later, my high school was named Henry McNeil Turner. And of course, it was still segregation, but we were made to feel so important because of the history of people like Ida B. Wells, but also Henry McNeil Turner, who was one of the, he served in the Reconstruction legislature in Georgia and was very aggressive in attempting to bring us to a more perfect union by including all of our people as human beings, not being seen by necessarily the color of their skin, although that was important too. But, you know, throughout those years, a long answer to your brief question.
It's beautiful. I'm going to keep my questions brief so you can keep your answers long. I should have started out with thank you.
Beg pardon?
I should have started out with thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
then I would have to thank you too. We've had the best I wish you could have been back there with us before we came out here.
Part of why I'm blushing and tongue-tied is because of that. You know, high school leads to college, and you, living history, integrated the University of Georgia. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, okay.
You and Hamp.
But that is also part of the answer to the first question, because yes, Hamilton Holmes, my late classmate, and I went into the University of Georgia as the first two African-American students after 2 years of legal efforts to get us into the school. But when I tried to be a regular student, although I wasn't treated that way initially. So I went to the Red and Black, which was the college newspaper. And the editor, who later became head of CNN, Tom Johnson, and he just wrote me the other day, he had a chapter in his book about me, and he wanted me to see if it was okay. And of course it was. So he wanted me in there, but there were students who didn't want to work with me. So while I could work in the office, you know, moving papers around and stuff like that, getting background, I couldn't go into the campus to work because the students didn't like me. And I couldn't go into the town of Athens because it was still segregated. So what did I do? On the weekends, I would go to Atlanta, where Julian Bond, our great hero, civil rights hero, and M. Carl Holman, who was a professor at Clark College at the time. He later became head of the Urban League. But this was when the Black students were demonstrating against the separate but equal in Atlanta. And so I would go, and they would get arrested and make a case and get bailed out. And then they would come to Carl Holman's basement to tell initially Julian and Carl the stories. But when I started going up on the weekends, I would sit there and I would write the stories. And then there came a time, and they would get published in this paper that they started, which was devoted to doing the stories of the movement. And so eventually I got tired of just sitting in the basement rewriting the stories. So I said, I want to go out and I want to get in the street. So I did that, and I covered stories about how the public hospital was mistreating people of color because it was the only place that they could go. One night I went down there late, and the bodies were all in the lobby of the hospital. There was no more room. There were so many people who had been shot and otherwise affected. And there was one guy, and I said to this internist, I said, what happened with him? Because he was laying there out in the hall, and he said, oh, somebody shot him in the head. I said, shot him in the head? And he picked up a scalpel and ran it into the guy's head. Okay, do I write that or what? But anyway, one day I also stepped up. Now again, I'm still a student. But I called the superintendent of schools to ask her, Miss Ira Jarrell. I can't remember much these days at 80, but I remember her name, Ira Jarrell. And I said, Miss Jarrell, I'm calling about, and I told her what it was about, but I was blown away because here was the superintendent of schools, white, and talking to me, Black, and a young person and a student at that. I was on my way at that point. I mean, that Atlanta and the student movement was what really, I think, set me on a course of, I wrote about a lot of different things, but it's always been important to me to write about our people, my people.
Yes.
Because not all of my people are Black, as you will see in the book. I got Black friends, white friends, Asian friends, all kinds of friends who are my people. But I wanted to capture our people in a way that they weren't being captured for the most part in most media. And I guess that's how I came up with the book.
This is quite amazing. I wonder to myself, when you were a little girl, 5 and 6, and sitting down, listening to your grandmother read the newspaper, did you ever think that you would be all over South Africa, that you would be all over the world, that you would tell stories of people from all different walks of life? Did you ever have a vision that this is how it would go?
Not at 5 years old.
Okay, 15?
But as time went on, and then, my father was a chaplain in the military. So through I never went anywhere because he was in World War II and then the Korean War. And so the families couldn't travel. So he didn't see me from months at a time. But I think it was his inspiration and the inspiration, again, Black history. My grandmother, my father's mother, was a very religious person, and she had not been to school either. And so when my father and uncle, his brother, a couple of years younger than he, went to school, at a certain point, my grandmother said, well, I want to go to school too. So she went. They were all in the 3rd grade, my grandmother, my uncle, and my daddy. And so I said to my uncle, I said, hello. I said, no, I'm waving at you. I said, weren't you a little embarrassed to be in the 3rd grade along with your mother? And my uncle looked at me like I had lost my mind. He said, embarrassed?
why we were so proud. Isn't that, I mean, I've never forgotten. There's so many things like that that just propelled me to try and get some of these things into the book, not least about our sisters too.
This is such an important piece. You have shown a light on Black women who have done amazing and incredible things that no one would ever give us credit for. Why did you think it was important to include us?
Because I wrote about them when they were doing what they do. And the book, of course, has come out longer than some of them are alive. But they were inspirational to me in so many ways, because so many of them also, you know, we've overcome legal separation and segregation, but even today we still have some of these issues. And so, you know, looking back at what some of these women like Shirley Chisholm and Eleanor Holmes Norton, Constance Baker Motley, who was the lawyer who got me into the University of Georgia, along with her team of lawyers like Donald Hollowell and Vernon Jordan and Horace Ward. Horace had tried to get in the University of Georgia and they wouldn't let him in, but he went out of the state. He didn't sue. So he was happy to be a part of this team that argued. And the lovely thing about these women, whereas they have achieved amazing things, in so many ways, they're still who they are as women. So here was Constance Baker Motley, and I think our case, they argued our case in Athens against to this federal judge for a week. And at the end of the week, I had enrolled at Wayne State in Detroit, so I wouldn't miss any time while the case was being argued. And they had a journalism program up there. But a Friday came, we'd been in the courtroom all that week, and I thought it was the end. So I said, okay, so I can leave, because it was December. Now, can I tell this? I wanted to get back to Wayne because that's when all the fraternity and sorority parties were being held for Christmas. I was 19 years old, come
Smart
on.
women need love too.
And so they said, oh no, she can't leave. And I said, I didn't say to but the parties were happening in Detroit. So again, Constance Motley had not said a word to me the whole week that she was arguing the case. But we would ride in the car together back to Atlanta, which was 70 miles away. So I'm pissed, pardon my French. And I go and I'm sitting in the car like this. And Connie comes out of the courthouse, opens the door, and sits next to me. Now, I'm used to her ignoring me, except when she argued my case in the courthouse. And all of a sudden, she reached down and she started rubbing her feet. And she said, you know, I have this problem with my feet. Now, she had never spoken to me before. And so I said, really? And then she turned to me and she said, and I'm looking like this, I'm still a little pissed. And she said, I know how you feel. I said, she knows how I feel? She said, I wanted to get back to New York this weekend to be with my 9-year-old son and my husband, but I've got to stay here too. So I know how you feel. And that was the beginning of another relationship with her. Now, she still didn't talk to me a lot, but I followed her. And then when I got to New York, working for the New York Times, and she was the borough president at that time and moving on up, I covered her in other ways. So here we go.
I love that story because when I was reading some of your essays, the way you put a human face on Black women, that we are out here slaying goals and doing beautiful things, and we can still go home and take care of things. And sometimes our legs hurt, and sometimes our feet hurt.
Right.
Why South Africa?
Well, my husband, who's here on the front row, holding the beautiful Valentine's present he gave me, which I would have worn up here, but it's a little warm, so did I make up for when I yelled at you? So my husband was working for J.P. Morgan, and J.P. Morgan had not been there like most corporations during apartheid. And now it was the end of apartheid, so he is asked by J.P. Morgan to go back and open the bank there. So we'd been married quite a while, and I said, and I was working for the NewsHour based in Washington, D.C. at that time. So I said, well, look, we both agreed that we could commute, right? Well, that didn't last long. He would come every 3 weeks or so to visit, and eventually we just decided that this wasn't gonna help the marriage, although we loved each other a lot, but we needed to be together. So I told him, I was having lunch with the head of NPR at the time, Lauren Jenkins, and we were friends. And I said, Lauren, I got to get out of here. I said, I got to move I got to be with Ron. And he said, well, that's great in a way. He said, because we are about to move the program from Kenya, where it had been during apartheid, to South Africa, and we need a bureau chief. Would you like to do that? This was and I said, well, I don't know anything about radio. He said, but you know about journalism. What's a great answer, isn't it?
A great answer.
So we agreed. So I come back. I have never seen Jim Lara so upset with me.
Oh, no.
Why do you need to do that? But anyway, he ended up giving me a party, a going away party, which had just about everybody in Washington, D.C. They finally told me, look, would you just cut your list down a little bit? Because I was inviting everybody I knew, no matter their color, no matter their politics, but it was a great party. And I moved to South Africa for NPR, and I did that for a year. And I didn't just work in South Africa. I traveled all over the continent. And one of the books that I wrote based on my experience in South Africa, I wrote it about how South Africa was more than how it was being covered. It was being covered basically in terms of the 4 Ds: death, disease, disaster, and despair. And that's not all there was to Africa. So I had to cover some of those things because I covered Ebola and all kinds of things that were challenging, and wars in Zimbabwe, and I should not want to go where, but I know that there are people here being treated in your town who come from some of the places that I covered. And I'm so grateful for this state to be receiving people who can no longer be comfortable in their own homes because it's too dangerous. But I went to places like that during war. And honestly, I just think that it was important to me, having come from the history that I had in America, to try and bring those people into a real reality that most people didn't know existed, to treat them as people. And then when they had issues that caused them to go to war, let's look at the reasons for that. Why are they fighting? And it was, I wouldn't say wonderful time, because then it sounds like I enjoyed war. I didn't, or some of the terrible things I had to cover, but I was able to expose things that people had no idea about. And I think that was, that helped me in my path as I work towards a more perfect union. Because if you look today at how the rest of the world is in trouble, in a sense, like our own country in so many ways, you want to be able to figure out how to you want to be able to understand the role that America played in the rest of the world, because we had principles, we had a constitution that talked about respecting people of all colors and how to have a perfect union. And so it was important in the rest of the world for us to behave like that. And so one worries now, because of the problems that we're having in our own country, what impact this is having on countries that used to look at us as the, what's the word I want, as the beacon light.
Yes.
But I still have hope. I'm still filled with hope because of our history.
What is your process of writing? How do you get inspired? How do you know what you want to write about? And then once you decide, how does it go?
Well, I don't always know what I want to write about. Right now, I want to write about people trying to get rid of Black history. And I want to write about
Please, right.
I want to write about it. I want to talk about it. I want to
Yes.
stand up and shout about it. But I still, even though I'm not working full time now, except trying to keep my husband and children happy, I look for things that I think are important, that have always been important as we work towards a more perfect union. And so there are times when I get inspired to write something. I don't have any place that I particularly submit things to, but the other day, David Remnick, the editor of the New Yorker, sent me something he was putting in the magazine. It was Martin Luther King's birthday, and he ran a piece that I wrote years ago about when I met, the only time I met Martin Luther King. And I actually had forgotten it. But then when I read about it, it took me right back to Auburn Avenue, which was the Black business street in Atlanta. Even during segregation, there were prominent businesses that were doing really well on Auburn Avenue, newspapers and drugstores and banks and so forth. And so I was still at UGA, but it was one of those weekends where I came home to work with the students. And we were down on Auburn Avenue, and the crowds were looking, and I was looking, what are they looking at? And it was Martin Luther King. So I go rushing up and I say, Mr. King, and he said, I know who you are. I said, I didn't say you do. I was a little bit shocked. And I said, well, I just wanted you. He said, we are so, and I couldn't even get the words out of my mouth as he talked to me, saying how proud he was of what we were doing down at the University of Georgia. And then so many other people were around him trying to say stuff that was all I got. But that was all I needed.
I mean, to say the least.
It was wonderful. That was the one time I met him, and yet it meant so much to me that someone of his stature could be so modest to tell some young girl running up and being crazy about running into him to say that. And so I've learned from my elders things that I think are important. And one of them is humility, because that's what he exhibited that day, humility. Now here's this big deal guy who is Mr. Civil Rights. And he says to this 19, 20-year-old, I'm so proud of you. Now, how do I not keep on keeping on?
Yeah, I mean, you almost feel obligated. I mean, at that point, he would see if you stopped.
Exactly.
Would you say that there is one essay, and I know this is so hard to choose a baby, but is there one essay that you will never forget?
That I wrote?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I try to remember all of them.
That's
but
a
the
good
older
idea.
I get, it gets challenging. But can I just share
Oh,
one real
please.
quick one?
Oh, it would be a gift.
Why do I want to share this one? because I think it has a message for us today.
Thank you.
As I'm hoping that some of these pieces in here have messages for all of us. But this was at the memorial service for Dr. Kenneth Edelin. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of him, but Dr. Edelin was an obstetrician, gynecologist, who was arrested for performing a late-term abortion in Boston. And he became, in time, he was, he got out of prison, he wasn't in there long, and went back and was supported by people who appreciated the stand that he took, even though it challenged his own profession, his personal profession. So he comes back and he becomes part of the the women's organization that supports well, there are all sorts of organizations that, but he became a women's champion.
Okay.
Let's just say that. And so when he passed away at a far too early age, people came and celebrated him. It was a celebration, which is what I hope they'll do at my service. Not anytime soon.
Exactly. No.
Anyway, it says, giving a brief summary of Edelin's pioneering career, the governor recalled that Edelin was the first Black chief of obstetrics and gynecology at Boston City Hospital, the chair of obstetrics at Boston University, and it goes on like that. But then there came a time at the end of the service where the Reverend Liz Walker, who had been a journalist, and now she had become a minister. Is that what's in store for me? I am a PK, but at any rate, finally, the Reverend Liz Walker delivered the eulogy. The former television anchor spoke movingly about the support she got from Edelin, her obstetrician, 20-something years ago when she was being publicly vilified for being public, pregnant, and unwed. Dr. Edelin, she said, gave her the inspiration and support to face the criticism without shame. In her softly soaring voice, she went on to tell the hushed and crowded chapel at Boston University the following, quote, "He probed the most profound depths of life, and he confronted his own mortality, something a few of us are able to do." She concluded with a few words about the many ways people use power, but also of the proper way Edelin used his, saying the following, "Power is at its best, is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." But the most powerful words of all came from Edelin himself, not the caring crusader, healer, and teacher, but a poet whose prescient words in the poem, The Labyrinth of Life, written a year before he transitioned. Now, I learned in South Africa, you never say DEAD or DE, you say transition. He adorned the page of the memorial program with these words, and these are Kenneth's, Dr. Edelin's words. "Remember what you learned each day. Use those things to find your way. Exercise your hard-won choice. Give your inner self a voice. Walk through the dawn, run through the night. Don't be paralyzed by fright. The journey's course will set you free. This journey is your life, you see. Now I'm at my journey's end. There is one gift to give again." By the end of the service, I write, "I was no longer thinking about my own mortality, but Ken's, which left me and so many others with a challenge and a roadmap to navigate this immortal life." That was for Dr. Edlin.
That was beautiful.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I literally do not get this starstruck over just about anybody, and somehow I cannot find my footing tonight, but I want to thank you again. Why is it important to tell people about Black traditions? Why is it important that they know that we don't say DEAD, that we honor our ancestors, that as long as we remember them and we say their name, they're with us? Why is it important for you to tell people about those traditions?
Well, for one thing, Nelson Mandela told me that the reason they honor those who passed and say they've transitioned rather than saying they, use the word because that means the end. When a South African transitions, those who knew this person feel like they can go to his grave or her grave and tell them their problems, and that the spirit of the person who has transitioned will help them solve those problems. And I just thought that was such a wonderful way of looking at transitioning. And so, in a way, when you miss people who have left us on this earth, like we just had a great friend, John Sims, who was an amazing artist in so many ways with his work on the Confederate flag and so many other things. But people came and talked about him at the service we had. And I heard them saying when he DIED and this and that. And at the end, I just couldn't stop where I had intended to stop talking about him to say, and by the way, and I talked about the whole issue of transitioning as opposed to the other word. And, like he was 54 years old when he passed, and so was Hamilton Holmes, my classmate at UGA. And so I believe that they are listening when I have a problem. I just spit it out and hope that they can inspire me to solve my problem.
Oh, that is incredible.
Mm.
You integrated the University of Georgia and you say that history is happening again. What's happening again?
What do you mean?
When you integrated the University of Georgia, there were issues that are still issues in the United States today. And you indicate in one of your essays that it's happening again.
Oh, right. Well, first of all, university is doing it's trying to help itself as it moves along. It still has issues, and my husband and I created a what do you call it, Ron? We created a like a foundation kind of thing where, a fund called
Thank
Giving
you.
Voice to the Voiceless, where we get young students who want to write about some of the problems that I've written about and others that they see around the area. We provide funds for the students to go and do their work. And so we just, this year, we have about 200 and some $1,000. And I got a letter this week from the president of the University of Georgia, Dr. Moorhead, who said that he was using some of his personal funds to help support our project. And some of his personal funds amounted to $25,000.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
I know, I'm so excited. And we had a conversation about it this morning, day before yesterday, sorry. And it's growing, and in no time, we hope to bring it up to even more.
That is fantastic.
Because it helps the young people follow in the footsteps of people who want to make a difference in other people's lives. And I think that starting with them in college is a great place to get them set on a road to do that. And the pieces that they've done in the past 3 or 4 years since we started a fund have been just amazing. They've been about women who've come from countries out of this world, not in this world, who've come to places like Atlanta, but some of the discrimination that they suffered in their own countries because they had to wear scarves and hide themselves from everybody, was still being mistreated even in Atlanta by their families. So one of the young women who got one of these Giving Voice to the Voiceless Awards wrote about it. And it was just wonderful. I mean, sad in a sense, because it wasn't a great story, but she did such a good job. And to have these young people in college with all the challenges that they have, going to class every day and doing their own homework, but also looking out and finding people who need a voice and don't have a voice. So that's why we created Giving Voice to the Voiceless, and they are just doing such wonderful work. So if you want to contribute, I'll tell you after the program today.
You can sign a book, leave a few dollars.
Leave a few dollars.
I like that.
No. But I think we're on the way with that. It's really, really going well.
I'm so excited and so proud. Thank you. That is legacy work.
And the other way I want to answer your question, because I think I know where it came from. As they say on television, that's a very good question.
Thank you.
We are having issues in our country, and my son is looking at me because he knows that one of the quotes I love is from LL Cool J, who said, "Don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years." Which means that we have problems that we've had throughout our history. And that's why I think we have the phrase "a more perfect union," and why I hope that books like mine and books that other people have done and programs like the one you do here will help people appreciate that you have to keep on keeping on, that we're all human. We have issues that we aren't always best informed about, which is why I think journalists are important, and which I think you and I were talking about this earlier, how important it is now to help save our local news organizations, because the money that used to support them is drying up. And yet, how else are we going to inform our citizens about what's going on right in their own communities? And how do you get people who have one idea, let's say about people of color, and not have them understand the problems that keep so many of people of color on the ground? They can't get up. And so if we have local news that not just reports on problems, but reports on good things that people are doing of all colors, I think that's one of the solutions that we have to how do we make our union more perfect. But you can't do it if you don't have the information. Jim Lehrer, my former colleague who's transitioned, used to say, "Give people good information and they will do the right thing." And I think he was right. Right, Jim?
You have been giving us good information for more than 5 decades.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I am,
Love it.
I'm blushing, I'm sure. Rob Gowdy, please bring the microphone so these lovely people can ask this incredible woman
Oh, aren't you sweet?
the kinds of things that you deserve to be asked.
Thank you. Can I be on your program another day?
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Did you just ask me that? Because if you meant it, you.
I meant it.
Okay, then wait for the podcast. It won't be long. I will call Edie as soon as I leave here. I give you Charlayne Hunter-Gault.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And And the fun is only continuing tonight. It is time for your questions in the audience, and I know you have so many. So please, if you have a question, wave your hand loud and proud, and I will come to you to get your question answered. Charlayne, we are in the back of the auditorium over here.
It's a privilege to have you here in Minneapolis. Thank you for joining us in our city, which is too well known now around the world because of George Floyd. I wonder if you could tell me your opinion. I had opinion a number of years ago when Black Lives Matter first appeared, and I told my husband, who's Canadian, that I felt it was this century's civil rights movement. I felt it was very important, and he didn't agree. He was Canadian, so he had a different perspective on it. I'd like your perspective on it, please.
On which?
On Black Lives Matter and
right.
its relationship, or if it is the civil rights movement, as maybe I knew it, I'm in my 70s.
Young girl.
Yes, just a baby. I, lived through that at the University of Minnesota, but I'd like to know if you feel Black Lives Matter is sort of this generation's, this century's civil rights movement.
Sure. Thank you for that question. As they say on television these days, thank you for the question. I think it's very important for people my age and the age of some of the rest of you in here to share our history with the younger generation. And so what I continue to call for is a coalition of the generations so that my generation can share with the younger generation the experiences that we've had, the things that worked, the things that didn't work, although all mine worked. But no, but I think that there are things that we can share with the younger generation as they pursue the things that they think are important to fix in this country as well as in the rest of the world. And I think it's important that we have these conversations, that we figure out how to have these conversations. I was telling you, Lois, a few minutes ago about, our Florida state is in a terrible turmoil, especially as it relates to teaching Black history in schools. And I remember that when we first moved to Florida, I met people at Florida College, New College, which is being challenged right now in so many ways. And I was asked to do the graduation address once, and they told me, now, these are very creative people, and they don't dress the way most graduates do. And sure enough, they came in, some were walking their pets, and some were dressed in flowers, and others were dressed in flags and all kind of crazy stuff. But there was one guy I met who, when he first came to New College, his father was a head of one of the big Ku Klux Klan factions there in Florida. He had been, I forget what you call him, but he was a big Ku Klux Klaner. And so his son had grown up in that environment, and he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan too. And when he got to New College, nobody initially knew what his background was, but at some point somebody told on him. And it went all around the campus, and people started treating him awful. And there came a time when one of the Jewish kids invited him to a Shabbat dinner on a Friday night. And he didn't have anything else to do, so he went. And for the next few months, every Friday night, he would go to this Shabbat dinner. And there would be different Jewish kids, and maybe they weren't all Jewish, although it was a Jewish event, Jewish dinner. But he got to meet other young people with ideas that were different from what he had grown up with. And it opened and this young man now not only graduated, but I interviewed him for the PBS NewsHour because I do these pieces that talk about solutions to racism. And I figured he had one, and he really did. And part of it was due to the Shabbat dinner where he met all these young people. And so he graduated, and he then went to DC, where he has been doing research on racism, going way back generations and years, centuries. And he's currently almost finished with the book. And I wrote him the other day because I wanted to find out what he was thinking about how the current governor is treating the state. That's all I'll say about that right now, unless you ask me a question about it. But he's just about finished with his book, and I want to re-interview him to get his perspective on what's going on in Florida right now. But not just Florida, other states in this country. So we need those voices. But to go back to the coalition of the generations, I want to be able to share with him things that we were able to do and able to achieve. And like, I was so impressed the other day with how the community, and they were people of all colors, related to the shooting in Memphis. And I was very worried that something not good could happen from them necessarily, that you get wound up maybe and possibly angry, which is understandable. But how do you address that? And clearly, history was on their side. History was on their side. And so I think that if we share our history and review it, because we sometimes forget elements of it, we can see where we have overcome and what we yet have to do. And like this kid, we have to talk to people who don't necessarily agree with us. But we have to have the information too, to help them appreciate, especially the younger generation. And so I want a coalition of the generations so that this new generation that's going to have to take over, or it's already taking over, can use some of the things that helped us to be successful during the civil rights movement. I hope my husband is looking at me saying I didn't answer your question, but I hope I did.
I'm not going to get in the middle of the marriage, but you did beautifully.
Charlayne, we have a question in the center here, and then we'll go over to this gentleman next.
Hi there, Ms. Hunter. It's a pleasure to meet you. I was actually at another event for a presentation with a distinguished professor of African Studies, and I left there because I wanted to be here. So that is still going on. It may have ended at 7:30, but I've been following you for the past 25, 30 years, and it's an honor. My question is about South Africa, because you resided there for how many years?
17.
Okay, what was your experience like being in South Africa compared to other countries in Africa? Because I haven't been there. I've been to a couple of countries in Africa, but I've always heard something different about the climate, racial climate in South Africa. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, like everywhere else, South Africa right now is going through its troubles. 8 or 9 hours a day, they have no electricity. Nobody can quite figure out how to fix that. The president has been accused of some things dealing with money that aren't very pleasant. And the ruling African National Congress, Nelson Mandela's party, may be losing their grip. Now, don't quote me, although I think we're on.
We'll race this
But,
part.
but I'm getting communication from friends that I know who are journalists, who are people who contribute to the growth of the country, who are very despondent about what's going on there now. And again, to go back to my other point, I remember when I first was involved in covering stories about South Africa was when they were demonstrating outside the South African embassy in Washington, students and officials and others who were working to help end apartheid. And that was when the Black South Africans and the liberal South Africans who wanted to change looked to the United States for support, which is another reason why we need to be doing what we've done in the past to inspire other countries as they go through their problems. So we've got our problems, they've got their problems, but we need to be informed of their problems so that we can help in any way we can. But I think primarily if we fix our country, that might help fix theirs. I'm not sure that answered your question, but okay, thank you.
And I'm sorry to say that this next question will be our final question of the evening, but the evening is not over quite yet. Charlayne will be signing copies of both My People and her previous book, her previous memoir, In My Place, out at the end of the bridge outside the auditorium. Majors and Quinn is here. We are so lucky to have them here selling copies of both books. So if you would like to get your copy signed, please visit Charlayne's signing table at the end of the bridge. And with that, it is time for our final question.
How you doing? My name is Marquise Bowie, and I work in the George Floyd Square. And my question pertains to the George Floyd murder and the Tyrese killing, seeing that it was same, but it was kind of different, seeing that you had Black officers that did that in Memphis. What is your take on that with the issues with the police in the urban neighborhoods?
But that's, as they say again on television, that's a good question. And I think that I've seen discussions about whether or not, you know, what's the difference? These were Black police officers who did it. But I think it's a challenging question. But I also think that there are a number of institutions that need work. And our police, my brother is a former Secret Service agent and worked with the police in Atlanta, Georgia before, and he's a really great guy, right? And so I don't know that race is necessarily the defining thing that we should use to determine how we relate to people and how we correct problems. These guys
say that because race is not an issue with the one in Memphis. That's why I asked the question.
but race is an issue when it comes to how we treat and train our police, whether they're Black or white or Asian or whatever. So it's the system that needs work so that we don't have Black men killing Black men, we don't have Black men killing white men, we don't have white men killing, we have police doing their job. And there are many who are doing their jobs, but I don't think you can make it a racial issue, really. I mean, it's painful. Like every time I turn on the television and somebody's reporting some crime and they pop up the picture and it's a Black person. And you say, oh my God. But that's where we have to work on our own attitudes and information. We have to inform ourselves. And if we have systems that need fixing, like the police the system that educates and trains them. Look, one of the pieces I did early on for the NewsHour, when I was doing, starting off doing solutions to racism, was a white policeman in Alabama. And this was what, 8 or 9 years ago? I can't remember exactly when I interviewed him. But he was retiring or had retired. But when he was an active police commissioner in Alabama, when he first got the job, he went to the training school where all the young policemen were being trained. What do you call that? The
Police Academy.
huh?
Police Academy.
Thank you, my son, dear, who helped organize all of this, and thank you for that, Chuma. He went to the police academy and insisted, now this was 20-some years ago, he insisted they put in a course on Black history in the police department in Alabama, and it made a difference. It made a difference, and he's white. So, one of the things that I often say to people is I don't like generalizations. I don't like people saying white people this and Black people that. That's too much of a generalization. Let's be, as we say, Pacific. You can take that as a mispronunciation of specific, but you can also take it to mean Pacific. Let's make it big, Pacific, as we try to figure out how we regain our position as role models for countries in the rest of the world.
I think you, author Charlayne Hunter-Gault, are absolutely Pacific. And I cannot thank you enough for what you left us here, for what you brought us here. And I will see you again very soon at Black Market Reads.
Oh, yes.
In the
thank you.
meantime and in between time, thank you to every beauty I see you who came out tonight.
Yes.
And thank you for letting us be your people.
Thank
Thank
you.
you to the Hennepin County Libraries. Go get books.
Thank you. Okay, should I get out with them? Okay, let me get you.
Okay. I will see you again.